Burgess here with Music Marketing TV. Today we are looking at the FETpressor by PSP Audio. We're going to be looking at it on this vocal first, some drums. We'll be looking at it in a sound design case, my favorite, and we'll also be checking it out on a master chain. Or where it's the entire master chain essentially, just by itself. So let's go ahead and dive right in here with the first of the examples. Got this vocal here. I'm going to bypass it right now. These are all the default settings. If we just play this, this is what the vocal sounds like.
Seeking things in bright golden wings, airborne dust floating in the air. Bottle luck came to us, but we were breathing out our cares.
So a couple thoughts on the vocal just right off the bat. There's a few spots where we get a little bit of like a forward backward type deal. This can be a good thing, but also when I recorded this vocal, the singer is just singing really soft. And so I had to do some things to get the volume back up. She's just really nervous, had a hard time singing loud, but gorgeous singer. But there's spots like this right here that present some issues. By the way, if this ever happens, I think this is mostly just FL. Just shrink it, close it, it'll open back up. But this right here,
Bottle luck came.
bottle luck. The B, specifically because it's a plosive, came out quite a bit more than the others. So I'm going to try and iron this out a little bit and just bring it up without totally killing the dynamics. So here, if we do this, we'll take a look here. Now, I really like compressors like this because they're more about feel. There's not a lot of you don't have to think super technically to use this. It's very artistic in that way. So I'm going to go ahead, pop it on. And this is it just with the default settings. I haven't even touched anything. And it will already kind of do what I want.
Seeking things in bright golden wings, airborne dust floating in the air. Bottle luck came to us.
That sounded so good. The bottled luck part is just like, oh, they nailed it. They got it just the way I want. So the makeup gain is a little much. We might dial that back some. But just to go through some of these controls real quick, because it is really straightforward. The attack, this one, that's a millisecond. Okay, it's not a second. This is 1 millisecond. If we move it here, you can see in the tool hint, 1 millisecond. So this is a pretty darn tootin' quick thing here. The release also is a if we move it around 100 milliseconds, nothing shocking there. The attack though is what I really want to drive home. It's a very fast attack. Our threshold is already set kind of at the right spot. The needle is moving it around in a way I like. It doesn't just sit down there, so that's good. We've got some healthy movement going after the transients. Otherwise, we'd have to adjust the attack and release and maybe bring the threshold down or up a bit more, depending on if we've got needle movement or if we have too much. There is a high pass filter here, sidechain high pass filter. We're not going to need this, but you'll see it come into play on the drum bus because it's useful for filtering out the kick and other low-end pieces. Also on the master chain, you're probably going to want to have this on. Ratio is 4:1. It's a ratio I like for this, so we're going to keep it. Over here on the makeup gain, it's been turned up a little bit. That's totally fine. And then we have some blend, and of course the bypass switch, and a linked switch. So this, links the two channels so that they have the same compression applied to them. You can have them sort of linked at the 50% or have totally individual compression, which I don't typically recommend unless you want, because it's at risk of causing it could change your stereo imaging. Because if one thing has more verb or something than the other channel, that could cause the compressor to compress differently, and it can further shift the image around. So I typically leave this on linked, but if I'm going for a stereo thing or if I don't care about that, it can be fun to try and use it to see what happens to stereo content. If it's mono content, it sounds the same in both channels. It won't matter. And then, blend. By the way, you have to click these to turn them on. By default, they're off. So this is fine. We're going to leave it 100% on. You could do some cool parallel compression stuff with that. But for this particular example, I really like this. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and just take a look here at this. I might move the attack back, but I really like it. I think the only adjustment that needs to be made from the default is just the makeup gain has to be turned down a bit.
Seeking things in bright golden wings, airborne dust floating in the air. Bottle luck came to us, but we were breathing out our cares.
If we go ahead and do the before.
Seeking things in bright golden wings, airborne dust floating in the air. Bottle luck came to us, but we were.
So it's just a little bit further back in the mix. There's again more of those dynamics. In this case, I don't really think. I think it's more of how it was recorded rather than any kind of actual expression, because it being on the sound is not coincidental. That's part of how it was recorded. So yeah, I'm gonna go in favor of this setting here. I really like it. And let's go over to our next example, the drum bus. All right, so here we've got this drum bus. Let's go ahead, let's play it with it off first. We'll put it in out so it's bypassed. And let's just hear the drums as they are. This is sort of a lo-fi beat. These are sampled drums, but the snare is sitting back in a way that is just too far back there. You'll hear it. Let's go ahead and listen. By the way, I'm hoping you're listening over some headphones or some monitors to get all that juicy detail. If you're listening over your phone or some other little speaker, you're going to have a hard time hearing some of these changes. So let's go ahead, let's dive in. So you can hear the snare is just a million miles away in the back, kind of doing its thing. I want to bring it forward a little bit. I've already got a setting dialed in a bit. In fact, this is just the default setting. It tends to work out pretty well. Gonna go ahead, pop this on. There is a few adjustments I'm gonna make. First, we'll bring back the makeup gain just a hair, just to start off. Bring the high pass filter on and pump this up just so that the kick, we should probably look at where the snare is living, but the kick is definitely below 100, at least the bulk of it. So I'm gonna go ahead and just set that there so that the kick doesn't trigger this. 4 to 1 is fine to start. We'll see. We may or may not pump this a little more or less. 1 millisecond will be plenty to grab what we want, and 100 milliseconds off will also be fine. We might even try bringing this back. So what this will do is when the threshold is crossed back over, the needle will just return faster, hopefully giving the bite of the compressor a more consistent move if we're going after like transients and stuff. So we'll see how that sounds. And then the blend wise, we'll leave that off for now, but we'll mess with some parallel compression stuff on this one too. So let's go, let's just hear what this sounds like. We could see the needle. So a few things just visually, you can see the needle follows the drums pretty well. So that means our attack and release are kind of what I want. Sometimes you want like an overall thing where the needle may not come all the way back up, but this is pretty fine. And I really like this sound already. So if we go ahead and do out, this is before. Here it is on. Before. On. So that is pretty nice. Let's go ahead and take a look at some more aggressive ways we could go after this to try and bring stuff out. So for this, what I'm going to do is bring on the blend. I'm going to bring it down to 50%. In fact, let's go 100% first. Let's just be super heavy handed. I'm going to bring the attack all the way down, the release down, make this super, super grabby. We're going to bring the threshold significantly down. So this is just going to be triggering like a madman. The high pass, we're going to leave alone. We're going to bring this up to like 8 to 1, maybe like 6 or 7 to 1. But a pretty high ratio. We're approaching like limiter territory. And so this is just going to be a super crunched drum mix. And what's going to happen is the verb in particular is really going to come up, and the snare has a lot of that stuff. So as we dial back the blend, we're going to have to pump the makeup gain quite a bit because it's just going to get slammed so hard. But as we bring back the blend and we insert some of those transients back, we're going to get a super sustained sound, which isn't really what I'm going for this mix, but just to show you kind of the characteristic it can bring with it. And it's something that could be useful at a couple spots in the mix, just to provide a little bit of context or something that's kind of interesting without changing the material all around, musically that is. So here is the super compressed. You'll probably see me pump the makeup gain however much we need. There you go. So let's go, let's dial this back some. Maybe somewhere around there. So in this case, I really don't think it matches the vibe of the track. Not a mixed move I would necessarily make, but just to show you how fast and easy it is. And also just, it's pretty dang clear for the amount of compression we're doing on it. I'm always kind of blown away just how nice the color of the compressor is. It's not unpleasant. It somehow remains pleasant, even though it's being pumped so hard. So I'm going to go ahead and dial these back a little bit more to something that, a setting I might actually use for this because I'm not interested in being that crazy with it quite yet. So let's just hear this one. That's before. After. So I'm happy where that sits. The snare comes out a lot nicer in this mix. And so I kind of vibe that. Now I'd move on and of course come through, and I'm sort of doing this in real time pretty quickly, but I might come back here, revisit this if I feel like I could get some better settings out, but I feel like everything's pretty much where I want it. Let's take a look here at some sound design. All right, so this track is a neuro-based track. It's got a really cool sound design patch in it that has a lot going on. As you can see, there's a ton. There's a whole separate thing too going on. But there's no more room in this chain. So I'm going to route this to another track before it goes over here to this submix. And over here is where we're going to put the FETpressor. So with this on, we are going to first bypass it because I want you to hear what it sounds like before. It's this like neuro bass thing. This is what it sounds like. So a lot of tiny moments have been precisely made to happen. So it takes a long time to make sounds like this, where it's mostly one synth patch. I think there's, if I recall, because it's been a hot second since I've touched this session, there's two main patches with subtle variations that give some of the vibes, and then a whole lot of automation to dial it all in. So with this, something that can be really fun to toss on at the end of a chain that's this complicated is a way over the top compressed thing. Like, just bring all the verb out, all the verb, have it swash around and then come back. And it creates this really weird feeling because normally when something goes into the distance, you hear it get softer and it just sort of trails off. But by doing this, you hear the reverb goes up, which somehow makes it sound more spacious because that you kind of associate a lot of verb with a big room. But then the direct sound goes away. It's this really bizarre effect, at least the way we interpret it. It doesn't really line up with how real life spaces work, other than maybe a gymnasium where someone's like backing up, but they're somehow screaming and the verb somehow gets louder as they move further away. Because the verb would still be there, but it would be going, it wouldn't increase in level. But in this case, it does. So it's just this weird sort of unnatural thing. So if we bring this in here, I'm going to just squash the heck out of this. We'll put it at -24. We'll make it a very fast attack. We'll leave the release. Well, in fact, we'll leave the release kind of up there. This is just going to get hit so hard. We'll bring up the high pass filter just for the extreme low end of this stuff. And the ratio, we'll leave it at 4:1, actually. That might be fine. And let's just look at how our makeup gain is sitting here. Oh, and let's, oh no, it's on. We got it going on. No, it's not. We want to bring it in. I'm like, I don't hear anything. There we go. So now we've got it on. Yeah, so you get all the verb to come out with it. So this of itself can be kind of overbearing. It can be really fun to move the attack and release around, especially if you have them both very quick, because it can affect the rhythm of the sound itself. So that can be pretty cool. After this one, we would need a high pass filter because the low end of the verb just gets out of control. It's chaos, right? So we'd have to put a high pass filter after that to deal with that low end on the verb. But another thing that can be fun, so you might choose to automate these around, is also mess with the blend. So blend, we can get the effect only for a moment. This is an effect that's very heavy-handed. So in general, if you really want it to be a neat effect that I think most people would say, well, that was such a cool moment, you're only going to have it on for a moment. You might automate the blend knob on and off to do such a thing. So I'm sort of just trying to match the phrase a little bit by moving it, but this is something where I would definitely automate and I would fine tune it to match exact moments in the sound. And you saw there are moments that really get a huge enhancement from this because the stereo image changes, the balance changes, the verb comes forward, just And if it matches with the phrase, it can be such a cool thing to do. So don't count the FETpressor out when it comes to stuff like this, especially because it has such a nice, heavily compressed sound. If that makes any sense. You can push this compressor hard and it'll still sound really good. So because of that, you can use it in these sorts of scenarios, and it's just really, really fun to mess with because there's really only a couple knobs that are worth touching. It can be really another experiment you could try that can be kind of strange is if you move the threshold around at the same time, you can get just the way it responds given an input. It could just be really interesting because sometimes you'll get just a gorgeous moment out. But it's never something I can kind of do on purpose. It's those things that just sort of happen on accident. So you may give some of these things a try. They could be really, really fun to do. I take advantage of a technique like this later on in this exact track in the second drop to keep things active and alive. And of course, you don't have to do this just on crazy bass sounds. It could be cool on background vocals or backup guitar tracks or drum overheads. There's a lot of cases where doing moves like this, where you mix them in just for a split second, can make a part just become larger than life. Now let's take a look here at one more example. We're going to be looking at it on a master chain. All right, so to wrap us up here, I've got here this track. It's called Chug Chug. Right now, I've cleared out the master chain, so it's completely barren. And this is what, just to give you a section, this riser section is kind of a good one to look at because there's a lot of elements. They're all separate. They've got their own verbs on them, so they just don't talk well to each other. But the parts themselves sound cool, and it already grooves. I'm hoping to glue it together just a little bit more, get that wax polish sort of on my machine going. So this is what it sounds like with nothing. So I'd like to, just put it together a little more. Just glue things together. Already has the vibe going. I just need to get them to talk to each other more. So we're going to go ahead, toss on a FETpressor here. And for mastering, of course, we don't want to be as heavy-handed, but I'm thinking actually a little bit higher order of compression here, like 3-to-1. We'll start off low, like 1.5 or maybe even 2-to-1. We're going to definitely turn on the high-pass filter and leave it at 100 just so that the needle isn't so driven by the kick. The threshold we can dial up a bit more. The release we can bring up, maybe even all the way. The makeup gain, we might use this as a bit of a gain stage, but we're going to turn that down some. And the blend we're going to just leave off so it's 100% compressed. And we might leave it at 50% linked. And we'll see how that sounds. So here's before. Here's after. And this part right here is kind of one of the more impactful parts of the track, right? It's the first drop. So I want to make sure that that's like nice and works really well. So let's do a little bit of before and after there. So there's before. Here's after. And this could kind of show you how it changes the balance of the mix too. So I am using this a bit as a gain stage. So we could dial this back a little bit more, try to get a bit more of a pure comparison. But to me, this kind of stuff, I don't know. If you're going for the final master out, do it however it's going to sound at the end. But let's just dial this back some and do a before and after there too. And after. So there's the comparison there. I am going to bring this up a bit more, and we could do something a little more aggressive. We could bring it up to like 4-to-1. Say we really want this to just slam it a lot harder. We could bring back the threshold a bit more, and let's say we want it to be a little bit more grabby. I actually am pretty happy with how the attack and release are sitting right now, but we could bring this back to something quite a bit more touchy, maybe go after more of those transients, events a little harder. And let's just hear this. Where before. especially this synth line right here really benefits from this. So this is actually a setting I might consider as a contender because that it just pops out so much better here. So again, we do. The verb on the horns too also just glues in just a little bit nicer. So this is something again where when you're doing something like this, you really got to listen to the whole track because there may be moments that are affected in ways you might not expect. A lot of the times though, with this compressor, I'm usually pretty happy with what it's putting out. It's pretty rare that I'm like, oh, I don't like that at all. And it's a welcome step in a chain where I might have a couple compressors doing lighter elements of work just to nudge the track together without having one just, going through it. Sometimes it helps to split it up. Sometimes it's fun to see what happens when you just ram it all through one. It's just, it's just one of those things where you got to try stuff and pick the one that you like the most. And it also, of course, helps to have a reference track to see, how close are you getting to that and if you want to go that. But if you're going to go the purest route, it could be fun to try some of those other things. If you have any questions about this, feel free to let me know, subscribe, and hit that bell icon for future videos, and have a blessed day.